as of today, there are European troops from a number of states that have deployed in Greenland. They are deploying in Greenland to perform essentially reconnaissance missions. It's something along the lines of about 13 Germans, 15 French, but the total combination of soldiers, and again, these are not soldiers being deployed to fight any war. These are soldiers being deployed to scout the location and to get troops on the ground as soon as possible, to have the diplomatic impact of troops on the ground, of starting the underlying foundations for a tripwire force, a force to trigger a diplomatic incident at the very least, if you were to a diplomatic incident that comes into direct physical conflict with the nation state that places the tripwire, triggering the tripwire, triggering a diplomatic response, possibly triggering a war, which is why it's called a tripwire force. Meant to have a deterrent effect. A deterrent against who? Well, if you ask the German capital, if you ask the French capital, the idea that will be given publicly will be, well, the Chinese and Russians, of course. Chinese and Russians have aspirations for taking this. There's security concerns. And it is true that if we were to go to war with Russia, if war was to be declared, that Greenland might be a significant target. It not even might be, it would be. I say might be to indicate that I don't know if the Russians would be able to capture it with the many other issues that our nation states would have if we had gone to full-blown war. Now, that's the diplomatic reason they're giving as to why they're putting these troops out there. But the underlying knowledge that we all have is that this also has other diplomatic, how do I put this? The United States is talking about annexing NATO territory, and NATO territory, in order to defend itself from another NATO state, has decided to deploy troops from other NATO states to try to prevent an inter-alliance conflict over land. They are afraid that the United States might act on its words or not take European security commitments seriously. And so a number of states that include France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom have all decided to deploy these recon forces that will likely expand into larger tripwire forces if this is the path they continue down, and they're given enough time to continue down this path to do the research that's necessary, because these forces are supposed to be leaving this weekend. They'll have the desired diplomatic effect of, hey, look, we're standing steadfast on this territory. We're going to stand on this ground. But when it comes to the actual military tripwire, this ain't it. This is a recon mission to develop those forces. Whether all these states will develop those forces, whether other states will come and participate in the development of those forces, I do not know. But what I do know is that the French for sure want to stay. According to the current French government, French President Emmanuel Macron said that this is an initial contingent that eventually be reinforced with land, air, and sea assets. Their senior diplomat, Oliver, we'll just say Oliver, okay? Very French names, okay? He said that this is meant to send a strong political signal, but this is a first exercise. And after that, we're going to show the United States that NATO is present. So this is directly from their top diplomat. They're saying this is meant to show the United States that NATO is present. So while the outward declared reason this is happening, both for the United States as one of the reasons that they want to take over Greenland, and from the Europeans as to why they're going in there, is to stop a possible Russian or Chinese incursion, when the most immediate threat to Greenland that is being discussed is an American one. Whether it's based really in these concerns, whether it's based in just pure expansionism, resource gathering, a combination of them all, either way, it's meant to act as a deterrent against Trump. So that's quite strange to think about. European troops right now acting as a deterrent against American troops as Europe is actively being invaded from the other direction. The idea that Europe, from their perspective, is not only being attacked from the east, but from its longest standing, 75, 80 years of transatlantic relations, is now being threatened from the west. When you say military options are on the table for military expansionism and the taking of conquest of land, and that land happens to be controlled by a European state whose people on that land would rather be with Denmark, if not on their own, than be part of the United States, according to all polling data that is relevant. I mean, this seems like Europe possibly being pressured from both sides, and one of those pressures are supposed to be their ally, are supposed to be backing them up. They're giving them their favorable trade deals when it comes to Trump's renegotiation of trade. They're trying to flatter the man constantly in an effort to see him back up their defense, to back up the Article 5 commitments, to back up all of our nation's commitments to Ukraine, to back up European and transatlantic security at the same time that the transatlantic relationship is threatened from the West, from the United States, through this expansionism. And when we talk about the reasons as to why this is occurring, there's no good reason from the European perspective or from the American perspective as to why this has to occur like this. Mind you, there is no desire from the locals to be part of the United States. If you look at what the population is saying in reports to the media, if you look at what the polling indicates, if you look at what the youth believe, there's no generational divide. There's, oh, young Greenlanders, they love the American TikTok and they want to be. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. This is a country, Denmark, that controls a territory that is still largely native, but has obviously a large Danish contingent, and has been having a conversation about splitting off and becoming its own thing. It has never in that conversation said, we want to be part of the United States. Funnily enough, in the conversation about Denmark, no longer controlling Greenland, if Greenlanders have this referendum for independence, which was, what would the result of the referendum be? Will we be independent? That was the conversation that was going on. And the result of that conversation could have been Greenland becoming independent. And what would Greenland do if it became independent? Who would it think, oh, who do we trade with? Who do we rely on for security? Who do we build stronger relations with? The United States. Greenland is in North America. Its strongest and closest neighbor is Canada, and then the United States. And so from their perspective, if we would have just literally did nothing, if we took the diplomatic strategy of just shutting up and stop jabbering on about conquests and hoi for braid, like, let me make the map bigger. If we just shut up for just a second, they could have voted for independence, and then it could have had not only stronger ties. We could deploy more troops in Greenland as it is right now. We could deploy more bases in Greenland. We have been cranking down our deployments in Greenland for decades, lowering our troop deployments under the idea like the Cold War is over. There's no need for like a transportation of huge amounts of logistics across the Atlantic for World War II or the Cold War. And so we don't need as many troops are deployed there. The amount of troops we have deployed there right now is 150. Right? That's a far cry from the heights of the Cold War or the Second World War. So we could, if we wanted to, reverse course for what we've been doing for decades and what we've been indicating to the Danes and to the Greenlanders what we want to do for decades, and that's shrink the size of our force. If we wanted to reverse course, it would make sense if we indicated that to them first before saying, oh, well, we just have to take it over. We just have to take it over. So if we were to just shut up, we could have even gotten a better deal than an increased deployment that we could have anyway under the current framework, which would achieve the objective that the Trump administration's having. But if they had to rely on American trade, had to rely on us being a friendly neighbor, then maybe we could have gotten even better terms. But because Donald Trump can't keep his mouth shut, because he cannot help himself, because he cannot help but be the biggest man in the room, he cannot help but be the strong man, he cannot help but flex. It's never enough. Being president of the United States isn't enough. It has to be, he has to have all the prizes. He has to have all the dignities. He has to have all the medals. He has to be awarded the Nobel Prize. And if he isn't awarded the Nobel Prize, he has to shame the Norwegians. He has to add land to America. He has to make America bigger. He has to do something from America's past that we didn't do. We didn't conquer Greenland when we talked about it in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We kind of like put that idea away because we didn't need to anymore. Because it isn't 1880, and we can have a diplomatic relationship with the Danes, which goes back quite far. And we can have this military deployment because we're allies, so it's not necessary. But he wants to have that achievement, that thing that other presidents didn't do, has to have that military expansion. And when I talk about the president in this way, people could say, Dylan, you're not seeing the big picture here. No, I'm seeing the big picture. Oh, it has to be controlled by us. Why does it have to be controlled by us? Well, the president said because we defend land that we own. Oh, then what does that say about Article 5? Why did the Danes go to Afghanistan? Should that have been more American coffins? Should it have been more dead Americans in Afghanistan than Danes? Should it have been more dead Americans than any Germans or Brits or anyone else? There were like huge protests in Germany when those deployments started because of their long anti-war heritage, but they still got coffins too. But now that we're talking about Article 5, now that we're talking about Article 5 commitments, I mean, look, when you say if we don't own it, why defend it? What does that say to Russia about Estonia? We don't own Estonia. We don't own Lithuania, Latvia. We don't own these countries, but we're controlled together in collective defense through Article 5. So not only is that stupid, that's also actively hurting our defensive position by asserting that, by the president of the United States asserting that. Every time he asserts that, he doesn't assert any right to control Greenland. He just asserts that the United States might not care to control, its bases overseas too long, in Europe. It might not hope to defend its allies. That's something that seems more indicative of that statement than, oh, wow, America has a right to that. America has a right to control this land. We must control this land. We have to control this land. Why? Why? There's no good reason. So the Europeans have started to deploy troops because they can't see a good reason, and most Americans don't see a good reason. You cannot get a majority of Americans and under any circumstance to support the use of force in taking of this land. So that's why the president's talking about buying it. But the Danish leadership has said they don't want to sell it. The Danish foreign minister has said they don't want to sell it. There's no support from a majority of Danish MPs. There's no support from a majority of the Danish population. There's not a support from the Greenland prime minister, premier. There's not support from the Greenlander MEPs. There's not support from the Greenlander population. There are more flat earthers in this country. There are more QAnoners in this country as a percentage of population than there are Greenlanders that want to be part of the United States. And you can throw 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000, how many dollars you want at them. That might change it up to 16% instead of 6 or 7%. That might change it up to maybe even one day 20%. But that's still not a majority. That's not even a plurality. That's not anywhere close. So there's no support there for selling it. And so that's why immediately, despite the fact like, oh, it's a business deal, it's a business deal, it's a business deal. If you're not willing to sell and then somebody leaves the use of force on the table, what does that say? If I come to your neighborhood and I say, hey, you know what? You have a really lovely farm here. I really like your farm here. I'd like to give you 20 big ones, $20 for this farm here. And they say, no, I would not like $20 for this farm. That's a lot of, I've never seen a $20 bill. Let me take off my hat. I've never seen no $20 bill before, but I don't want to sell my farm. It means a lot to me. Okay, well, I just want you to know that we reserve the use to shoot you if you don't take this here $20. There's no way to read that and it's like, oh, this is nice diplomacy. This is friendly diplomacy between allies. This is diplomacy between states that both took casualties in Afghanistan fighting after we were attacked. Why would they ever do that again? Why should a single Dane ever die defending the United States under any circumstances if the United States treats its sovereignty as so piffy and so unimportant that regardless of what the locals believe, regardless of what the general public believe, regardless of any principles of the sovereignty of the nation state that Donald Trump has lauded on and on about on the campaign trail, despite any of that, just fuck it. We'll just take it. Not a good deal. And so the Europeans have deployed their troops. And if it is true that this will eventually expand into Air Force deployments and, larger deployments, maybe even armor from the French, from the Germans and such, the Swedes, and the Norwegians, the Swedes, and the Finns, all of these people have a reason to be interested here. The Arctic is their home as well. And so if this continues on this road and Trump wants to continue on this road, we have to think about this for a moment. What is the deterrent capacity? Because I don't want to play out an invasion to say to war game this here for fun or to war game this here under the idea that I know this is going to happen. But we have to war game this here because there have been even reports of other options being drawn up for the president. And we need to think about what the president would consider, an effective deterrent from him invading. So if the French, German, and all these other forces increase their troop deployments, a lot of these forces respond to the political heads in their nation states, right? Paris, Berlin, etc. And if they tell them to stand down, they stand down because these armies ultimately report to their heads of nation states. So if they increase the deployment size, they have thousands of troops there. If it ends up being something like 10,000 European troops in Greenland, and you have maybe 5,000 Danish troops or however many Danish troops in Greenland, that's going to be that's going to be quite a large deterrent force. Not only because, there's a coalition of different nation states and the diplomatic repercussions, but it might be sizable enough that you can probably predict that a few of those troops might fire back, even if European capitals tell them to stand down, which is what Trump would hope. The problem then comes to the lethality. While the diplomatic effect of having all these different nation states in there as a trigger force, as a force to trigger some sort of response from their nation states, that will have the biggest diplomatic deterrent. I think the biggest lethal deterrent will be as many Danish troops there are on the island, as many Danes as they can put on that island. That will be the biggest lethal deterrent. And the reason why is Danish law is clear. When the Nazis invaded Denmark during World War II, there were many Danes that were cut off from command. They couldn't communicate. They didn't have the wire set up, and so they didn't know what to do. And when these overwhelming German armies marched on their towns, many of them decided to, hand up their arms because they didn't know what was going on. They were not getting word from command, and they didn't know if they were supposed to fight or surrender or what their orders were. So some fought, some surrendered, and Denmark fell quite quickly. After 1945, when the Nazis were kicked out of the country and Denmark became an independent country again, one of the first things it did as part of its national defense policy was establishing a rule that if attacked, if the national sovereignty of Denmark is treaded upon, if an army invades, the soldiers are supposed to fight back basically under all circumstances. That you do not wait for a call from command, you do not wait from a call from Copenhagen, or from NATO General Command, or from, your grandma to tell you it's okay, it's not a sin, like whatever it is. You don't wait. You just open fire and you defend what you're supposed to defend. You defend your point. You do your job. Now, whether or not every single Dane ends up following that policy, or even if the Danes tell them ultimately to stand down from command, having a policy like that in effect means that the chances of there being American fatalities, especially if there's thousands of Danish troops deployed along the island, and while the Danish cannot, deploy hundreds of thousands of troops there, thousands of troops is something that is more feasible. And thousands of rifles or thousands of opportunities for American soldiers to get shot. And does Donald Trump, for territory that the vast majority of Americans could not really care less about, and even for the ones that are okay with buying it, not a lot are really all that hyped about buying it, but for the ones that are, they certainly don't want to take it by force. Is he willing to risk such a thing, not only from the diplomatic backlash from Europe, but when it comes to the public backlash from home, when there's already been a lot of critiques that he might be keeping his head on the foreign scene a little bit too much? Not to mention, like, what is he doing over there? Because I was told 24 hours. Anyway, but he's keeping his head on the foreign scene. He's not dealing with the domestic political concerns. He's not dealing with these things at home. That's the problem. So is he going to really follow through with something like this? That's going to be unpopular right now? And oh my God, could you imagine? And this is why I brought up the lethality of those Danish soldiers. If we have to kill people that are traditionally shown as America's allies, could you imagine we end up killing some Afghan Danish vet? And it's reported like Afghan Danish vet who saved to America, who fought the Taliban with us in Afghanistan. They largely worked with the European contingent, so a lot of American troops didn't see the Danes, but they did fight there. Could you imagine if that was on headline news? We're killing the people who were our allies 20 years ago, and that were supposed to be our allies until the day we invaded. And not only that, what if we also get the reports home, American soldiers come home in coffins? Because again, if they have the order to defend, regardless of communication blackout, that could lead to American soldiers getting shot and killed. And let me just say, there are Danes that care about their country. There are Greenlanders that care about their country. This is not you're losing Nicolas Maduro. That's not what this fight is. This is not, there's one tyrant who has been killing their people for years and years and years and years, who has degraded the state, that has turned the country that was turning out 3 million barrels of oil to 1.1 million barrels of oil, and the state has decayed, and he has to be protected by a foreign guard because he's so suspicious of everybody around it, and then you go and you snatch him and bring him out. That's not the same operation. Because that's not an operation to take one man and then try to establish dominance over this country, which is what we did. This is an operation to eliminate Greenland as an independent entity, or as an entity as a part of another state. This would be like if we went into Venezuela and then we said Venezuela is part of the United States, we need the oil. We need the oil to just be in the United States. We're not going to defend something that's not ours. So is he willing to deal with that domestic backlash? Is he willing to deal with that diplomatic backlash? Is he willing to deal with that potential fatalities over this, when he could have, again, every single one of his objectives achieved through diplomatic means? But I still don't think it's impossible. Even with the fact that our other objectives could be completed through diplomatic means, he is set on it. Listen to this. Donald Trump says he wants ownership of Greenland because it's, and I quote, psychologically important. Psychologically important for me. Let me read this. During a 2-hour sit-down with multiple Times reporters on January 7th, Trump was questioned about why he won't just send more American troops to Greenland. Again, there's currently 150, which is legal under a Cold War era agreement, if his goal is to fend off foreign threats. The president replied by saying that he won't feel comfortable unless he owns the island. Why is ownership important here? Because that's what I feel is psychologically needed for success. I think that ownership gives you a thing that you can't do, whether you're talking about a lease or a treaty. Ownership gives you things and elements that you can't get from just signing a document. What?
Occurred is occurred.
What is it that it gives us?
Man, all of this instead of just releasing the Epstein files.
Thank you for the $5. You can't just get from signing a document. You can have a base, that you can have a base. Psychologically important for me. White House correspondent, oh my God. White House correspondent Katie Rogers, who Trump recently called ugly, both inside and out, for writing a story about his age, chimed in to ask, psychologically important to you or to the United States? So when talking about the psychological importance that is necessary for us to do whatever job he's talking about when it comes to Greenland, that we couldn't just deploy more troops, that we couldn't just have more bases, that we couldn't just deploy more resources under the agreements that currently are structured, while not risking a diplomatic relationship with Europe, while not risking a diplomatic relationship with Denmark, while not disregarding the sovereignty of nation states, while not violating international law, while not violating, I think American law when it comes to, Congress getting a say to something like this, and violating what the locals want, what the people who actually live on the territory you're talking about want. Is it psychologically important to you or the United States? It is psychologically important for me, Trump answers. Now, maybe another president would feel differently, but so far, I've been right about everything. Psychologically important. That's why we have to own it. That's why we have to threaten war. That's why you have to threaten bombing these homes and killing these people and invading these lands. That's why we need to, that's what use of force means. People, oh, use of force. That's not what they said, Dylan. You're being overdramatic. Use of force, that's what that means, okay? You think special, what does special military operation mean? Okay, that's coded language. That's nice language. That's filtered language. But that's what it communicates to. And this is what we're threatening. We're threatening the use of American power to take over a land, not even for the United States. Again, we could achieve what he is saying is our stated goals through just continuing through currently existing treaties. We would not even have to ink up paperwork. We wouldn't even have to add more bureaucracy. It would be completely fucking redundant. But he continues. And he says, it's not psychologically important for the country. It's psychologically important for me. This is for him. This is for him to make himself look like a conqueror. He wants to get this image of his head. He wants it to be him on a bronze horse, unsheathing a sword, conquering foreign lands, putting foreign peoples under the boot, showing American exceptionalism and dominance, but more importantly, psychologically, his. I mean, look, I'm sorry, but this is the worst possible answer anyone could possibly give for why are we threatening the use of force, war, which is the big, actual, truthful way of spelling that. War. We're threatening that over what? What's psychologically important for me? If Trump needs something psychologically important, you know what he needs? He needs therapy. If he needs something psychologically important, he can go and he can get a rage room or whatever installed in the White House, and he can just go smashing TVs or whatever. He can do whatever he wants on his own time, okay? He can make a ballroom 10 times bigger than the White House to show everybody how much of a big man he is. But we don't need to go threatening the 80 years of legacy in the transatlantic alliance. Disrespecting those who threw their lives away in the mountains and the desert to protect the city, New York, that they had never seen, so Trump can get a psychological boost. We don't defend what we don't own. He doesn't know the damage he does with every word that falls out of his mouth. We don't defend what we don't own. So then you don't defend allies at all. So why should any of them defend you? The damage this man is doing to this country's reputation, the future diplomatic avenues of the United States. We can get someone competent to replace this man in 3 years. We can get an administration around him who actually have experience in the fields that they practice. We don't need no RFKs. We don't need no Tulsi Gabbards. We don't need no Pete Hegseths. We don't need no Kash Patels or Dan Bongino or the Fox News Brigade. We don't need to put this Fox News host or that Fox News host as the top lawyers or judges in the country. We don't need to do that. We can go and we can go back to the path of just not being knuckle draggers, let alone a pathway that would deal with the institutional problems that got us to this. But even if we just get that one step out of the way, what other country is going to trust us as a long-term, reliable security partner they could build a solid foundation upon? We can't. We can't. Now, maybe there's a benefit in the fact that we shouldn't be the basis of the entire alliance's security structure, but the fact that we're unreliable and we're seen as snaky and slippery, and one day we'll say we're with you as long as it takes, and the next day we'll say, oh, God, you started the war. You're not negotiating your land away fast enough. God damn it. Figure it out. We're going to cut off intelligence. We're going to bring back intelligence. The person under me doesn't even know what he's doing. He's just kind of, he's kind of just shifting around the paperwork. Don't worry about it, buddy. That reputation is going to stick. It's not going to stick for a year. It's not going to stick for years. It's going to stick for decades. We're going to have to deal with it. It might stick a little less as decades pass, but people will still remember. People will still remember not even that Donald Trump did this or Donald Trump did that, but that the American people put him in a position so Donald Trump could do this and Donald Trump could do that. And that's where their lack of security is going to come from. Oh, I almost forgot. I did almost forget that I want to give Ted Cruz immense credit. I know everybody here is big fans of Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz maniacs in the chat, stand up. Okay, throw up your gang signs or whatever you guys do. Now, I wanted to give him immense credit. Okay. Now, of course, I'm not going to be donating to him anytime soon, but he did get something right. And he got it right scarily. Now, not 100% accurate, but 90% there. But if he is 100% accurate, then I think we're really screwed.
We need someone with judgment and the temperament to keep this country safe. I don't know anyone who would be comfortable with someone who behaves this way having his finger on the button. I mean, we're liable to wake up one morning and Donald, if he were president, would have nuked Denmark. That's not the temperament of a leader to keep this country safe. We need a president who will have the back of our fighting men and women, who will have their back and will be clear-eyed and focused on our enemies, on radical Islamic terrorism, and on defeating ISIS. That's what I will do every day.
What happened to that man? Do you guys recognize that man, by the way? Do you guys recognize that clean-shaven fella in the man that is Ted Cruz today in the United States Senate? I don't recognize him. He sounds like such a dork. Well, some things never change.